What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and we're back for another episode of the fighting game tutorial series. In this episode we're going to be going over cleaning up our character a little bit more. So in quite a few episodes we have been covering cleaning up our game, and we're doing this because we want our game to be nice and easy to work with and play when we're getting to more advanced mechanics like actual AI, because we have some basic state changes and things we can tell it to do, but when it has to think we want this to be clean and easy to do, and when we want to get into rollback netcode we need to make sure everything is accounted for. And even things like story mode, we want to make it very easy for us to switch between these modes and do what we need to do without any hard-coded or coupled logic, or as little as possible. So the last few episodes have been huge improvements. I'm very happy with them, but we can still do a little bit more, and we're going to continue to as we make this game as good as we possibly can. And to do so, we're going to continue working on the character. In this episode, we're going to be going over cleaning up the character blueprint again. We've covered that a lot, but now the blueprint is really getting into a much better state, and I want to make sure we finish this off. And this one's going to be a more generalized episode. I'm just going to go through and start handling some things that I see in there. So let's just hop right into it. So if you want to get caught up in the series before you check out this episode, you can see how we've done things like our attacks, our hitboxes, our animations, our command buffer, and a whole lot more. I'll link you to the entire playlist of the fighting game tutorial series right here in the top right corner. And you can check that out and get familiar with how we do everything that we can do in this series. Alternatively, if you don't care about the whole series and you're just trying to see what our character can do or how to make a character in C++ for a fighting game, you're still in the right spot. You don't have to follow all of those episodes to do this, but I do recommend that you watch some of the other cleanup episodes we've done on the character, as all of these episodes are really important. They're all cleaning up logic that I think could be improved upon. And so you can get a feel for what I think is good design for our game, what I think we did well from the get-go, and a lot of things like that. So I'll still link you to the first episode of our character cleanup if you're interested right here in the top right corner. And with that out of the way, we can go ahead and get started. So this is a code and blueprint tutorial series. As I said, I really want to hammer out this blueprint for my base character BP and my individual characters. We've converted a lot of logic to code. It is much smaller than it was, but we still have some improvements in some ways that we could handle this, so I'm going to do that in today's episode. So the event graph is pretty good at this point. It could be better. There are more things we could do, but the majority of it at this point is the hacky logic for keyboard mode, which I'm keeping in to support. That way one input device can control two characters. But we have a few other things in here that go along with what we changed recently. So we recently changed it so sound effects and materials were not hard-coded. They were added to an array which each character can set. And based on which character you are, which palette index you are, you can see what your materials should look like or what your sound effects should be. And another one that I did not yet alter is the event change to damage materials. So we do have a different set of materials that can be applied when we go below a certain amount of health. Some games will do an effect like this where they'll either change part of their outfits or they'll change some of the mesh or change the materials. And we're supporting this. However, again, we have hard-coded logic in the base character blueprint for which material we want to go to. Now this worked for the time being, and it does work since we really only use our mutant in our game to this point, but we don't want to do this. We want to support this in a much better way, and it's very easy to do this in code as well. So this is one thing that we are going to fix today. After that, we can start going into some of our functions. We don't have anything in our construction script. And the P1 add input image and P2 add input image could vastly be improved by simply consolidating this logic, and that is one thing that I want to cover as well. So first things first, this change to damage materials event. Now this change to damage materials event is one that we made a blueprint implementable event in the code, and that means we can call it from the code. However, I want to set the damage materials based on the character, as I was mentioning earlier. I don't want to force it to be damage material mutant or damaged mutant 2. This should be dependent on the character. Remember, this is in the base character BP, so if all characters support this, we don't want to hard code this. And additionally, we should have an array or some way of indicating which damage materials we have to use, because I don't want to have to go find them in the graph every time. I should be able to assign them to the character, or look them up in a data table, or whatever the case may be. So as we get more and more assets, we may want to move some of these things out of the character itself and put it into a data table. But for now, this is fine. And even with the change we're going to do today, if we decide to modify it further, it will be easier to do. So first things first, I want to make an array of materials that represent the damaged materials for our character. And to do that, I can go to the code. So now I'm in Visual Studio, my IDE of choice, and I'm going to go to fighter template character.h, and I'm going to scroll down to my variables. And in here, I made some variables previously to store the default materials and default skins that our characters have. And you can see they're here. We have mesh materials, and these are default materials to apply to the character's mesh. Then we have the X attack materials, so the materials for those X attacks. We also want to have the damage materials. I'm also going to switch these two around. I think the default material should be on top, and then we have the X attack materials, then we can have the damage materials. So the materials to apply to the character's mesh for when their health falls below a certain value. So just the damage materials, right? And then we can make it the same new property as the other ones here. Edit anywhere, blueprint, read, write with the category of materials. Now note that this does not have to be edit anywhere with blueprint, read, write. This allows us to edit it and access it within the blueprint defaults in the graph. We could just assign this in the defaults for the character and that's it. I'm leaving it open now, so if you want to be able to modify them and add more while you're playing the game, you can do so. I'm not going to need that for today's episode, but if you do need it, then this is what you will need to do for full control. And we can make a T array of U material pointers, and we will call these damage mesh materials. Then we can launch the game again. So Unreal is back open, and we can go into blueprints, character BPs, base character BP, and come down to our logic here. Before we were setting m_damage mutant and m_damage mutant 2, but now we will have that variable if we go to class defaults right here, and we can search for the materials section or just scroll down this list until we find it, and you'll see that we have damage mesh materials. However, I don't want to set any default values in here like we were doing here. I want to go to the individual classes. So in my case, I only have the damage materials for the mutant. So I can go to the mutant BP, go to the class defaults, type in materials, and then come down to damage mesh materials and add 2 elements to it. And I know my elements are going to be m_damaged mutant and m_damaged mutant 2. Then I can compile and save that. At this point, all the materials for my mutant are set up properly, and that means I don't need to hard code these values. Instead, I really only need one mesh set material node, and instead of using a switch statement here, I can use the palette index and pass that into our array. So if I get my damage materials or damage mesh materials array here and get a copy and pass in my palette index, I can use that for the material here. And you could check for validity to make sure that character has a damage material at this palette index. This should be valid because I'm going to assume all my characters have one, but you can always do a check for is valid index and check for palette index. If you don't have one though, just add one unless you don't intend all characters to support that. And this has been cleaned up significantly, and now it will work for all of our characters right off the bat. Now I'm going to take this event and move it over here to the right where I have some other events based on materials. So now we have 3 events here which all do basically the same thing. They grab the corresponding array of materials, either X attacks, mesh materials, or damage mesh materials, and they're setting the materials based on what's in the class defaults for the character. I'm going to put these together and I'm going to leave them alone for now. Let's go and focus on the other thing I want to tackle for today's episode, which is the P1 add input image and P2 add input image. We can open both of these up, but they're 2 functions that track our input stack. One tracks it for the character on the left, and one tracks it for the character on the right. So basically, any inputs pressed by the character will be displayed by their corresponding icons on the screen for things like practice mode. However, we had 2 different functions, and you're going to notice as we come in here, these functions are exactly the same. The difference is that anywhere P1 is used for P1 add input image, P2 is used for P2 add input image. But really, we don't need to duplicate all this logic. All we actually have to do is determine which variable or which index to use based on which player it is. Now this likely was created the way that it was when we were going through the series because I looked at all the variables that we have in here for player 1 and player 2 and they are pretty specific. Look at the P1 icon images. So we have an array in here for all the input stack icons that the character has. And then we look at the HUD reference and grab the P1 input stack widget there and grab the input stack vertical box here so that we can actually display them in the screen. But we can really just check if it's player 1 or player 2 and do the same logic, and that's what we're going to do. So we are going to make a new function. I will just call it add input image or input stack icon. I think that's a good name for it. And we can copy the logic from P1 add input image as a reference point. And it may need a little bit of cleaning up here, but something like this will work. And then this function takes in the icon index, basically what input we press that is going to be displayed on the screen here. So we can do the same thing, add an input parameter of type int and call it icon index. And we can connect this and do a little bit of cleanup here. Again, got a little messy just as things changed in the series and as we upgraded our engine version. And there we go, this is much cleaner. So now this icon image array is a local array that we have in this function, which has all of the icons here. We can right click and copy all the elements of that array and put it into our local variable here. Or we can simply copy the entire variable. Just right click and paste variable. And I did it incorrectly. I want to paste it as a local variable just to match what we have over here. And I will rename it to icon image array, compile, save. Now all of the images should be here, and they are. So now I can try and refresh this node, or really just get my new local variable will probably be easier. And we'll see if we can just plug it in safely. If not, we can just remake the get. But it's letting us do that, so there we go. Now this compiles. So what we need to do is determine if we're player 1 or player 2, and that determines if we're using P1 icon images or P2 icon images. Now a funny thing about this is that we have P1 icon images and P2 icon images for both characters being displayed on the HUD. This is a little bit of overkill, but we can still clean this up the same way even with having these two. And as we're cleaning up our HUD a little bit more, we can get rid of these. I'm going to add a parameter to add input stack icon right here. And we can say Boolean is player 1. So the purpose of this is to determine if it's player 1 or player 2 that we're going to display the inputs in their input stack. Now from here it's very simple. We can just modify the logic to replace these hard-coded variables in the function to either P1 icon images or P2 icon images based on the result of this Boolean. So to do this, we can simply use branches or select statements. So you'll see that we have our P1 icon images here. If we drag off of our Boolean or we make a select statement, we can put in our two arrays that we want to use based on a condition. And so we either want to use P1 icon images or P2 icon images based on this is player 1 Boolean. And I actually put them in backward because the false is the top part of the select here, which means is player 1 is false, which means we should use the player 2 icon images. Let's flip those, make sure we have the right one. Then we want to put this select statement in the correct spot. So we're replacing this P1 icon images that's going into this insert with the result of the select. That's literally going to choose which array based on the condition, but it's only one set of logic. We don't have to keep copying this logic everywhere. Then we'll do some cleanup to this area just to make it look nicer while we're working through it. Then we want to do another select statement. This time we're determining which input stack widget that we want to use, which one we want to add the children to or clear children from. So off of the HUD reference, we need to grab P2 inputs, which is our player 2 input stack. And we want to do a select statement here as well. And we can either do it on the input stack widget, so P1 inputs and P2 inputs, or we can do it on the input stack vertical boxes. And I'm going to actually do it on the input stack vertical boxes. So if we grab off of P2 inputs and search for input stack vertical box, this is the actual child component that is holding all of those icons. The input stack is the parent widget. And we want to do a select on these two. As long as they're the same type, we can do a select statement on it. So just type select and plug these guys in, and then we will plug in our isPlayer1 boolean again. No, I flipped them again. If isPlayer1 is false, we should use the player2 input stack. So I'm going to flip these around just so it is clear. Then we'll clean this up and use the select statement in place of everywhere we were using the P1 input stack vertical box. Now at this point you'll see we have another loop using P1 icon images. We can actually just use our same select statement result here, which would be more efficient than getting the select statement again. And it also takes up less room, so I'm just going to use a reroute node to connect to this for each loop and clean it up. Then after this, we have another spot where we're using the P1 icon images again, and we can just use the same select statement result. So I'm going to plug it in here and clean it up. Also note that we are going from loop body of this array to another loop body of this array. We do not need to be doing this. At the very least, we should only start this next loop when we've completed the first loop, and I'll show you that both of these do the same thing afterward. But for now, let's just assume that this is good. And let's go back and determine where these functions are called. P1 add input image and P2 add input image. We can do this by right clicking on the function and find references. Event add input icon to screen, which we trigger from the code quite frequently when we press inputs. But we no longer need to call these two separate functions. In fact, we should only be calling our new function, and we should replace the branch with just using the isPlayer1 boolean that we have on the character. So I'm going to call add input stack icon, pass in the icon index to the icon index in the function, and then pass in isPlayer1 into this function. Note, you could flat out just use isPlayer1 with the select statements instead of passing it into the function. It's up to you how you want to do this. But now it is significantly cleaned up, and if we test this out, we'll see that everything works. Now you can delete your P1 add input image and P2 add input image functions, compile and save, and everything should work the same. Now go ahead and test it out, and you'll notice that everything works as expected. No matter what input I press, it works. It prints to the screen on the character that I would expect. So I have my second character just constantly blocking in this AI practice mode state. And so you see it's even working for the AI as it's telling it to enter the blocking state, and it's pressing that input and it's filling that out. And for player 1, every input I am pressing is printing the right icon to the screen. At this point, we can go back into our add input stack icon one more time and fix up that for each loop I was telling you about. Instead of going from clear into another loop of itself, we should go from the for each loop completed into the other for each loop. Test it out again, and you'll see that everything still works as expected. I hope you enjoyed this episode on cleaning up your character yet again. As you can see, every episode we do get quite a bit closer to finalizing the logic that we have so far so that we can dive into these more complex topics going forward. If you enjoyed this episode and it helped you, please subscribe. It does the most for the series that you can do, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. If you do want to give extra support to the channel or to myself, you can check out the YouTube membership, Patreon, and Discord subscriptions to get some extra benefits along the way. Thank you so much to all the kind souls who have. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much. If you ran into any problems while following this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. There is a link in the description, and I would be happy to help you out. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.